close combat continued in Marinka and Bakhmut. During a press conference at the Kyiv Press Center Sunday afternoon, April 30th, Colonel Georgy Gleba said Russia is focusing its main offensive efforts on the Marinka and Bakhmut regions, with Ukrainian and Russian forces fighting on the streets of cities, often at short distances. According to him, the front line has barely changed during the past week. At the beginning of the week, the Russian troops withdrew from their positions to turn to the defense for fear of being counterattacked, so the fighting took place only in Bakhmut and Marinka. Over the past few days, fighting has flared up again in 4 directions: Lyman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Marinka. But the area of Marinka and Bakhmut is the focus of hostilities. There, the greatest amount of offensive activity was concentrated, and in those 2 places fighting in the streets continued, sometimes at quite close range, he said. He noted that the skirmishes took place at a distance of less than 100 meters and in some places at a distance of even less than 50 meters. He also added that the Russians continued to build multi-layered defenses in the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. The enemy continues to build layered defenses and reinforce their positions. And it's not that there are hardly any plot attacks in these regions. At least there were shelling. And in these areas the Russians actively use reconnaissance drones. In the past 24 hours, 470 Russian soldiers have been removed from the battle along with 2 tanks, 5 armored vehicles, 6 artillery systems, 1 mass-launched missile system, an air defense system and 6 troop transport vehicles and fuel. Collectively from February 24, 2022 to April 30, 190,510 Russian troops were eliminated from the battle. Total combat losses of the invaders also included 3,699 tanks, 7,189 armored vehicles, 2,914 artillery systems, 544 mass-launch missile systems, 295 air defense combat systems, 308 aircraft, 294 helicopters, 2,475 drones, 932 cruise missiles, 18 warships, 5,842 troop and fuel transport vehicles, 357 special equipment units. 2. Former Russian commander warned Putin to face the risk of mutant. Newsweek has a report titled "Putin Faces Threat of Military Mutiny, Former Russian Commander Warns," which means former Russian commander warns Putin to face the risk of mutant. Former Russian commander Igor Girkin on Saturday warned that Russian President Vladimir Putin could face a mutation from the Wagner Group, a private military unit that leader Yevgeny Prigozhin is reported to have threatened to withdraw troops from Bakhmut. Girkin wrote in a Telegram post that calling for the withdrawal of units from the front without the consent of the senior commander is a military rebellion and nothing else. The Wagner Group has played a key role in aiding Russian forces in their efforts to gain control of Bakhmut in Ukraine. However, Prigozhin often openly criticizes the Russian Defense Ministry for not providing more ammunition and support to its fighters. In another Telegram post on Saturday, Girkin wrote that Prigozhin had openly blackmailed Russia's military leadership by warning that the Wagner Group would leave its post in Bakhmut if the matter ammunition supplies to his forces were not resolved on Friday. The former Russian commander also wrote that Prigozhin was aware that a withdrawal could lead to catastrophic consequences for Russia ahead of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, scheduled for this spring. The West, including the United States, has been providing the Ukrainian military with advanced military equipment, tanks and artillery, among other resources, to help this war-torn country prepare well for the upcoming counterattack. Girkin added that Prigozhin warned about the withdrawal in a letter to Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Newsweek could not verify whether Prigozhin had given Shoigu this warning, and that his group of mercenaries were indeed running low on ammunition. However, Reuters reported on Friday that Prigozhin said his forces were suffering heavy casualties because Putin's regime did not support his group. Leader Wagner this week also said he was joking when he announced that his army would stop attacking Bakhmut to allow the Ukrainian military to introduce the city to American journalists. Meanwhile, Girkin wrote on Saturday that Prigozhin had previously spoken badly of both the Russian command and the Russian military in general, and said, "We must forget what the airborne forces are doing. They're in Bakhmut." Girkin is a fierce critic of Prigozhin and the Russian Defense Ministry over its activities in Ukraine. Last month, he said that Prigozhin's removal was very necessary. As his political ambitions were multiplied by his psychopathy, organized war crimes, his tendency to shamelessly self-promotion, and in many ways propagated the false concept of corrupt criminals for the armed forces, he only harmed both Wagner and the general cause of victory over Ukraine, Gherkin wrote on Telegram at the time. He also said that paramilitary mercenaries, along with the Russian army, needed to be withdrawn from the front lines to replenish and reorganize, so that they could then be used in a more promising strategic direction to break through the front. Newsweek has emailed the Russian Defense Ministry for comment. 3. Prigozhin threatens to withdraw Wagner Group from Bakhmut. Newsweek had a report titled "Prigozhin threatens to pull Wagner Group out of Bakhmut," which means, Prigozhin threatens to pull Wagner Group out of Bakhmut. Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of Russia's Wagner mercenary group, said his fighters would leave the fiercely contested Ukrainian city of Bakhmut if they do not receive ammunition delivered from Russia. Speaking to a Russian military blogger with ties to the Kremlin on Saturday, he said Wagner fighters would continue to fight in the besieged city of Donetsk, but would soon need to retreat away organized or stay and die, according to the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, based in Washington, D.C. Prigozhin directly appealed to Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu to deliver ammunition immediately, in a clip posted on Twitter by Anton Gashenko, an advisor to Ukraine's interior minister. Prigozhin, a longtime associate of Russian President Vladimir Putin, has repeatedly publicly called for ammunition supplies to his Wagner fighters in Ukraine. In February, he accused Shoigu and General Valery Gerasimov, who commanded Moscow's forces in Ukraine, of treason and of trying to destroy the Wagner Group by creating a shortage of ammunition. Medicine. Prigozhin also released images of what he said were the bodies of Wagner soldiers killed in Bakhmut, claiming their deaths were caused by starvation of shells. Paramilitary forces have played a prominent role in Russian operations in Bakhmut, a city in eastern Ukraine that has seen some of the fiercest fighting in the country since the outbreak of the uprising. All-out war in February 2022. Capturing Bakhmut is Russia's top priority and defending it is a steadfast goal of Kiev fighters. The clashes in Bakhmut have caused so many casualties on both sides, that the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, has previously called the city a festival of the Russians. Are we attacking Bakhmut or not? Are we here or not? Prigozhin added in the clip posted by Gashenko. We are patriots and we came to Bakhmut when we had the last cartridges, but these cartridges are not for weeks but for a few days, Wagner added. Prigozhin stepped up his efforts to persuade the Kremlin to turn defensive in eastern Ukraine, in an interview on Saturday. The ISW observes that Prigozhin's threat to withdraw from Bakhmut may also indicate that Prigozhin is concerned that Russian positions in the Bakhmut rear are vulnerable to counterattacks. Ukrainian officials and Western analysts have long discussed a counterattack from Kiev's forces in the spring, though details of Ukraine's activities have not been made public. On Saturday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told Scandinavian media that there will be a counterattack and I think it will be successful. Without giving further details, Zelensky added, "Do we have enough weapons for that? I would say we are well on our way to the fact that we have enough." On Friday, Ukraine's defense minister Alexei Reznikov hinted that a counterattack could be imminent, and told the media that we are ready to a high degree. As soon as it is God's will, the weather and the decisions of the commanders, we will do it, he added. Newsweek has reached out to the Russian Ministry of Defense and the Wagner Corporation for comment via email. 4. Yevgeny Prigozhin announces Wagner will cease to exist. Russia's Wagner private militia, which is leading the offensive on Bakhmut in Ukraine and active in Africa, may soon cease to exist, its founder, Yevgeny Prigozhin, said in a statement. The video was released on Friday night. It is unclear when Prigozhin spoke and how serious he is in this statement. He said earlier this week that he was joking when he said his forces would stop shelling Bakhmut to allow Ukrainian forces to introduce the city to journalists. Reuters reports that he told Russian war blogger Semyon Pegov, "Now, for the general demand for shells at the front, what do we want? Today we are coming to the end of Wagner. Wagner, for a short while, will cease to exist. We're going to be history, there's nothing to worry about, things like this happen all the time." Pegov posted the clip on his Telegram channel. Wagner did not immediately respond to a request for comment. 5. President Volodymyr Zelensky said Ukraine will not delay counterattack despite the lack of F-16. Newsweek published an article titled "Ukraine Won't Delay Counteroffensive Despite Lack of F-16s, Zelensky," which means, President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine won't delay a counteroffensive despite the lack of F-16s. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that despite the lack of F-16 fighter jets from the West, his country would still launch a planned counteroffensive in its ongoing war with Russia. "There will be a counterattack, and I think it will succeed. I will not give details. Do we have enough weapons for that? I would say we are well on our way to the fact that we will have enough," Zelensky said Saturday when speaking to Scandinavian media. Zelensky has repeatedly appealed to Western allies to provide fighter jets so that his army can establish air superiority over the Russian army. Poland was the first country to supply the jet to this Eastern European country. Earlier this month, Germany approved Poland's request to re-export 5 German MiG-29s to Ukraine. So far, 8 MiG-29s have been supplied to the war-torn country from Poland, the Kyiv Independent reports. Recently, Slovak Defense Minister Jaroslav Nad confirmed that his country had delivered 13 MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine as promised by Slovak Prime Minister Eduard Heger last month. President Joe Biden is among world leaders who have refused to supply Ukraine with jets despite a protracted pressure campaign. Biden said in an ABC News interview in late February that he rules out sending F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine at the moment. The president said that military officials have determined there is no reason to provide them. "No, Zelensky doesn't need the F-16, Biden said. "According to our military currently, there is no reasonable basis for supplying F-16s. Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, later defended the president's position in an interview with CNN, saying, "Ukrainian fighters can retake the territory that Russia is currently invading. Strategy with existing equipment. The F-16 is a question for later," he said. And that's why President Biden said that, for now, he's not going to go on with those things. The immediate task is to organize a successful counteroffensive so that Ukraine can regain its territory. His territory. Rajan Menon, director of the Grand Strategic Program on Defense Priorities, told Newsweek on Saturday, "The F-16 at this point is a Ukrainian dream, still unrealized and probably impossible. Can be done. Even if Kyiv receives the plane, the training time will be extended." He added, "The longer Ukraine delayed the counteroffensive, the more the Russians had to prepare the defensive positions they had already begun to work on and deepen over time." The end result, Zelensky was right not to delay the Ukrainian counterattack. Dmytro Kuleba, Ukraine's foreign minister, took to Twitter on Thursday to comment on the lack of F-16s his country has received. "Weapons that we were told would provoke Russia to escalation if supplied to Ukraine but never happened: artillery, mass-launch missile systems, air defenses, vehicles, tank, long-range rocket. So will the F-16. Giving F-16s to Ukraine will deter Russia instead of provocative. Time to take this step," he wrote on Twitter. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg told reporters on Thursday that alliance members have now delivered more than 1,550 armored vehicles, 230 tanks, and a large amount of ammunition and unidentified equipment. Another to Ukraine to support its next offensive operation. Speaking at NATO headquarters in Brussels, Stoltenberg praised what he called unprecedented support for Ukraine over the past 14 months. "In total, we have trained and equipped more than 9 new Ukrainian armored brigades. This will put Ukraine in a strong position to continue recapturing the invaded territory." 6. President of the Czech Republic visits internally displaced people in Dnipro. President of the Czech Republic Petr on Saturday visited internally displaced people in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro. Because of the war, many Ukrainians lost their homes. About 200,000 of them have found refuge in Dnipro, Pavel said, adding that his country will focus on humanitarian aid and development in the region. The Czech president called Russia's invasion of Ukraine barbaric. "I hope to never see pictures like this again." One of the photos from the Czech president's account shows Pavel writing the words "Russia, go home" on a military vehicle. "We are on the Ukrainian side. You will avenge what fell, you will regain your freedom." Russians, come home, he wrote. Pavel and Slovak President Zuzana Chaputova visited Ukraine on Friday in their first joint foreign visit. Pavel won the Czech Republic presidential election in January and took office in March this year, following a strong campaign in support of NATO and the European Union as well as aid to Ukraine. A former military commander, Pavel became chairman of NATO's military committee for 3 years before retiring in 2018. 7. Search and rescue operations ended in the Uman apartment attack that left 23 people dead, 2 people still missing. The search and rescue operation in the Ukrainian city of Uman has ended, following Friday's deadly rocket attack on an apartment building, according to regional emergency services and the interior minister. Ukraine case Ihor Klimenko. Klimenko said the attack left at least 23 people dead, including 6 children, and all of them have been identified. 3 boys, including a 1.5-year-old child, 2 teenagers aged 16 and 17, and 3 girls, aged 8, 11 and 14, were killed, he said. 2 women are still missing, Klimenko said. Vasyl Kozanenko, Uman's deputy police chief, told CNN they were probably dead. The attack is believed to be the deadliest attack on Ukrainian civilians in months. According to Klimenko, the rescue was challenging. 17 people were pulled from the rubble, with 9 injured. I am grateful to the emergency services, police, utility workers and dozens of Uman residents who participated in dismantling the collapsed building. The work happened very quickly because everyone was in a hurry. We were hoping to find someone alive under the rubble until the last minute, Klimenko said. According to Yulia Norovkova, a spokeswoman for the region's emergency services, the building continued to collapse during the emergency operation and parts of it were inaccessible. About 150 officers were involved in the rescue efforts. More than 100 people have received psychological help, added Norovkova. 8. Russia's deputy defense minister is under sanctions but his mistress still lives the high life in Europe. Svetlana Maniovic is a woman with expensive hobbies. She invites a Parisian jeweler to her door for custom jewelry, couture, and Mediterranean cruises. The lavish lifestyle is nothing new to those of her Russian elite and her lavish spending has been shown on Russian social networks and sites. But she is not the nameless noble of Moscow. Her mistress, Timur Ivanov, was a senior architect during Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a man who, on paper, is said to have an official income of around $175,000 a year. He is also subject to sanctions by the European Union and the United States for the war in Ukraine. Maniovic is the subject of an extensive investigation by the Anti-Corruption Foundation, or ACF, an investigative team set up by jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. The ACF alleges that it was Ivanov, and the ill-gotten gains from his government position, that financed Maniovic's lifestyle. 9. Russian court finds a female lawyer who resisted Putin's invasion, despite her insistence on being imprisoned. A court in Russia has sentenced a woman through social media posts condemning the war in Ukraine and fined her a hefty fine even though she asked to be jailed. Marina Novikova, a 65-year-old lawyer, was found guilty of spreading false information about the Russian military, which was made a criminal offense after Vladimir Putin sent troops into Ukraine. According to Sky News, Novikova's posts on the messaging app Telegram condemned the invasion and criticized the Russian government. Prosecutors asked for a 3-year prison sentence and Novikova pleaded with the court to let her go to jail instead of being fined at least 700,000 rubles or $8,700. But instead, the court in Seversk imposed a fine of 1 million rubles or $12,430. Russian human rights and legal aid group OVD Info quoted her husband, Alexander Gavrik, as saying. 10. A Moscow court fined a Russian baker for decorating her cakes with pro-Ukraine and peace slogans. Since Putin's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Russian authorities have banned any public criticism of the attack. On Friday, the Izmayovo District Court in Moscow ordered baker Anastasia Chernyshiva to pay a fine of 35,000 rubles or $435 for discrediting the Russian military, a court representative told Associated. Chernyshiva, who runs a baking business, has posted pictures of colorful cakes bearing slogans against armed conflict on Instagram, where she has more than 25,000 followers. She was briefly detained on Thursday after an extremely hawkish Russian media outlet drew attention to her work in January. Other cakes, decorated with hearts and flowers, are symbols of Ukraine's pop culture or have pacifist slogans such as "Love will win" or "We love you." 11. Russia says it will send an official diplomatic note protesting what it calls the illegal occupation of its embassy in Warsaw by Polish authorities. Moscow's ambassador to Poland, Sergei Andreev, told Russian state news agencies on Saturday that the move was illegal, but Poland said it had the right to take back the building. Andreev told TASS news agency, "Today, the Polish authorities decided to take strong action, despite the fact that this is a diplomatic building, a school building. This is illegal and violates the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. We will of course file an objection." Polish state news channel TVP Info reported that police were present outside the school on Kielekiev Street in Warsaw on Saturday morning. The already strained relationship between the two countries deteriorated further after the war in Ukraine, with Warsaw helping to arm Kiev. 12. Intelligence Bulletin of the UK Department of Defence Intelligence. One of the weaknesses of the Russian troops participating in the war in Ukraine was the lack of discipline, from resisting marching orders and fleeing in the midst of skirmishes to looting and raping innocent civilians. In the latest intelligence report, the intelligence service of the UK Ministry of Defence said the following about how Russian commanders treated soldiers who violated discipline. In recent months, Russian commanders may have begun punishing disciplinary violators by imprisoning offending soldiers in zindans, which are makeshift cells that include holes in the sky. The ground is covered with a metal mesh. Many recent reports from Russian soldiers give similar accounts of being drafted into zindans for misdemeanors, including being drunk and attempting to terminate their contracts. In the early months of the war, many Russian commanders were relatively lenient in enforcing discipline, allowing those who refused to fight to quietly return home. Since the fall of 2022, there have been increasingly draconian initiatives to improve discipline within the force, especially since Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov took command of the operation in January.